The Silent Whispers of Hemlock House. Emily and her younger brother Jake were orphans. After the tragic death of their parents in a car accident, they had been shuffled from one foster home to another until, finally, they found a place that seemed permanent: Hemlock House. The large, Gothic mansion sat at the edge of a dense forest, its dark silhouette looming against the overcast sky like a grim sentinel. Mrs. Thorne, their new guardian, was a stern, elderly woman with sharp features and a voice that crackled like old parchment. Despite her austere demeanor, she had welcomed Emily and Jake with a peculiar warmth. The children, desperate for stability, clung to the hope that Hemlock House might be the sanctuary they had been searching for. The first few days were uneventful, filled with the mundane tasks of settling in. Emily, a keen observer, soon noticed the oddities of Hemlock House. The floors creaked even when no one walked upon them, and the antique mirrors seemed to follow her with their reflective gazes. Yet, the most unsettling thing was the whispers. Late at night, when the house was cloaked in darkness, she would hear faint murmurs coming from the walls, like voices from another world. One stormy evening while Mrs. Thorne was out, Emily and Jake decided to explore the house further. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of adventure, they ventured into the attic. The air was thick with dust, and the only light came from their flashlight, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Old trunks and furniture were haphazardly strewn about, relics of a bygone era. As they sifted through the attic's contents, Emily found an old leather-bound diary. Its pages were yellowed with age, and the ink was faded but still legible. It belonged to a girl named Eliza, who had lived in the house over a century ago. Emily began to read aloud. May 3rd, 1893. Father has been acting strange since Mother died. He spends all his time in the basement, and I hear strange noises at night. I fear something terrible is happening in Hemlock House. Emily and Jake exchanged nervous glances but continued reading. May 15th, 1893. I saw him today, the man in the black coat. He whispered to Father, and Father listened. They spoke of rituals and sacrifices. I am scared. The entries grew more frantic and incoherent, ending abruptly with a final chilling note. June 1st, 1893. The whispers are getting louder. I can feel them inside my head. If anyone finds this, please know, the house is cursed. Leave while you still can. A sudden crash from downstairs jolted them from their reading. They raced down, hearts pounding, to find Mrs. Thorne standing in the hallway, a broken vase at her feet. Her face was pale, and her eyes darted around the room as if she were searching for something unseen. You shouldn't be up there, she said, her voice trembling. There are things in this house better left undisturbed. That night, the whispers grew louder. Emily lay in bed, clutching the diary, while Jake slept fitfully beside her. The voices seemed to seep through the walls, filling her mind with a cacophony of hushed words. She strained to make out the phrases, but they were just beyond comprehension, like a half-remembered dream. The next morning, Mrs. Thorne's demeanor had changed. She was agitated and distant, muttering to herself as she moved through the house. Emily noticed her constantly glancing at the basement door, her eyes filled with fear. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily and Jake decided to investigate the basement. They waited until Mrs. Thorne had fallen asleep, then crept down the creaky stairs. The basement door was locked, but Emily had found an old, rusted key in the attic that she hoped would fit. With a click, the door swung open, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. The air was damp and cold, and the smell of mold was overpowering. As they descended, the whispers grew louder, now accompanied by a low, rhythmic chanting. The basement was vast, filled with old, decaying furniture and stacks of musty books. At the far end, a heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar, a faint light spilling out from the cracks. They pushed the door open and gasped. The room was a macabre shrine with strange symbols painted on the walls in what looked like dried blood. In the center of the room stood an altar, and atop it lay an old, leather-bound book. The chanting grew louder, echoing off the walls, though no one else was there. Emily approached the book, her hands trembling. It was the same book Eliza had described in her diary, the source of the house's curse. As she opened it, the chanting ceased, replaced by a deafening silence. The pages were filled with incomprehensible symbols and drawings, detailing dark rituals and summoning incantations. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and the room was plunged into darkness. The whispers returned, now a cacophony of screams and cries. Emily and Jake huddled together, their flashlight flickering as if it, too, were afraid. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its form shifting and amorphous. It moved toward them, whispering their names. Emily recognized it as the man in the black coat from Eliza's diary. His eyes were hollow voids, and his mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. "You shouldn't have come here," he hissed. "Now you will join us." The figure lunged at them, and the room erupted in chaos. Emily grabbed the book and threw it into the fireplace, the flames consuming it instantly. The figure screamed, its form dissolving into smoke as the book burned. The whispers grew louder, then faded into nothingness. The door flew open and Mrs. Thorne stood there, her eyes wide with fear. "What have you done?" she cried. "You don't understand the power you've unleashed." As the last of the book turned to ash, the house began to tremble. The walls cracked, and the ceiling groaned under an unseen pressure. Emily and Jake ran up the stairs, Mrs. Thorne close behind. They burst out of the basement, slamming the door shut behind them. The house was collapsing, the ancient wood splintering and crumbling. They raced outside just as the roof caved in, the entire structure imploding with a thunderous roar. Hemlock House was no more, reduced to a pile of rubble and dust. Breathing heavily, Emily and Jake looked at Mrs. Thorne, who stared at the ruins with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "It's over," she whispered. "The curse is broken." In the days that followed, the siblings were placed in a new foster home, far away from Hemlock House. The whispers were gone, but the memories lingered. They never spoke of what happened, but every so often, Emily would catch a glimpse of a shadow out of the corner of her eye, and the whispers would return, if only for a moment, reminding her that some secrets are never truly buried.